and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On this episode, I want to talk about something a little bit different. I know typically I get into, the types of play and sometimes our emotional mindsets. But today I want to talk about breakups. I want to talk about what happens when our dynamic ends, what happens when we take a break with our dynamics, what happens if our partners, when we break up with them or we take a break from each other, go out and sleep with somebody else, and where this kind of lies and the effect that it does have on us. I do want to apologize now a little bit. I know there's some background noise. There's some serious road construction going on, so that's a little problematic. I'll try to make sure I weed that out in the audio. So I want to take you all back a little bit, a good, dating myself, 15 or 20 years. There was a sitcom called Friends, and there was a couple in there called Ross and Rachel. And this has been long debated for a great period of time, whether or not Ross and Rachel took a break, or if they actually broke up in their relationship and then Ross went out and slept with somebody else. Because Ross had this one-night stand, the issues began to manifest from this point. Busy work schedules, the miscommunications the two were having, although that was small in the grand scheme of things compared to what was permissible and not permissible during their separation and their breakup. When we look at these types of things and when we try to analyze these types of things, I want to look at this first from like the married angle. What happens to a married couple when they want to take a separation and they're living apart and they haven't filed for divorce yet, right? So they're together but they're not together. Well, in therapy, when couples are going through couples counseling and they're hitting some rough patches, there's a thing that we talk about, and not all therapists do it, not even all couples want to agree to it, and we call it a therapeutic separation agreement. Now, this is to cover feelings, kind of an agreed upon rule set that we can go by, not unlike the negotiations we deal with in the lifestyle about what can and cannot transpire while we are separated. The whole point of this is to give clarity so we understand each other's expectations during this time that we're apart, whether we're trying to figure things out, whether we're going to come back together, so on and so forth. It's important to understand that we have to give some sort of clarity and depth to the length of how long we are going to be apart. We're going to reconvene in 6 months and decide whether we want to get back together. We're going to continue with the marriage. We're going to continue with the relationship, whatever. If we are going to live together, we're not going to live together. There are some married couples that end up saying, you know what, I don't want to. I want to go get my own place. How do we handle if we have children or pets? We'll be quite surprised to learn that people set up visitation rights for their animals. And finances, which is one thing that, when you're together with somebody for a long period of time, gets intermixed. Who pays for what? How do things keep moving forward? All of these things are things that get worked out in this agreement. And it's not unlike doing legal. This is more for, it's really held more on your own respect and your honor. It's not really an overall legal document. If you take it to the realms of getting into notarized or having it drafted by an attorney, you're moving into some different areas, but I don't want to digress on that too much. But the reality is, if the couple is in therapy to try and restore their relationship, their marriage, it's not only beneficial to use something like this, but it also helps them when they're working on their therapy together and possibly their individual therapy. And I always tell people, when you're having marital struggles or you're having relationship struggles and you're deciding to seek couples counseling, never ever balk at the fact that you may need to have individual counseling, that you may need to talk about your problems that you can't necessarily resolve in front of your partner. And there's nothing wrong with that. We still have to get over this idea that there is some sort of stigma attached to talking with somebody. Not every time, the majority of people that go to see a therapist or a counselor or, someone else in the field, a clinician, is there always something wrong with their mental health? And among these things, when we start looking at this, and it's more often a very common question that therapists hear, is, are we allowed to date other people if we are on this separation? Which eventually takes me back to this Ross and Rachel thing, and I'll get there in a minute. The realization is that most therapists will end up telling you, if you're working, and we're going to strictly stay with the marriage side of things first, they will tell you to adamantly avoid having sex with other people. Because once you start introducing 2, 3, multiple partners into the primary relationship, it makes it difficult for people to actually focus on repairing the marriage. These become distractions. We start looking at this as the whole grass is greener on the other side, but the reality is the same problems that you're already experiencing in one relationship will eventually and inevitably carry over into another. Because we haven't addressed our issues, we are running from them. And when we run from our problems, eventually they catch up to us. So more often than not, relationship therapists, relationship counselors will tell people, try not to do that. Obviously, there is no legal precedence here. There are, I think, for example, I recently read about Florida that talks about infidelity laws, and it's somehow criminal. Don't know too much about it, but for those of you in the States that live in that part of the region, you could look into it more, maybe let me know. But when I'm looking at this example between Ross and Rachel, they not only operated on a lot of assumptions between the two, but they operated on the premise more that it was more important for them to be right about their position than it was for them to be concerned with making the relationship move forward. Ross was in his firm belief, although regardless that he was upset, from what I recall, to go out and have a one-night stand. And this led to, for Rachel, this fictional character, to encompass all of these emotional hurt feelings of betrayal when the discovery was made, when Ross admitted to it, and there was some sort of an attempt at a first reconciliation. Now, they weren't married, they were just dating. And I'm going to get to that part a little bit different, because these are two different types of relationships, right? And we experience these types of relationships inside of the lifestyle community, and regardless of where you're at, whether you're in the leather or gay community or LGBTQ community, whether you're part of the high protocol community, there are going to be people who are just dating. There are going to be just starting out their relationships. There are going to be quite a few married couples together. So one thing that we know, we always tell people, there's one thing about infidelity that never changes. More often than not, it always involves deception. And people will instantly spout in, oh, well, this is where polyamory is great. Well, that doesn't work for everybody. And I'm going to do a show later on about polyamory and actually the downsides of it. But again, I don't want to digress too much. When someone goes out and has made a conscientious decision to carry on an extramarital relationship with somebody else, secrets, especially the ones that involve sex, or more often than not, the emotional intimacy of them getting involved and sharing their deeper feelings with someone other than the person they're with, in this case would be their husband or wife, ends up leading inevitably to feelings of extreme betrayal, complete lack of trust, and more often than not, for quite a few people, they find it's almost impossible to overcome. I was kind of looking around social media today before I kind of stumbled upon this post, and one thing that I ended up finding out was this became a common theme. And there was one person that was commenting that an incident that had happened 2 decades prior was still troubling them, because the person, while they were on a break or separated, their partner went out, engaged in sexual activity with somebody that is in their social circle, And even 2 decades on, even though they're in a strong, healthy, monogamous relationship now, is still finding issues moving forward. Now, there was a lot of disparaging comments, and I'm always try to understand somebody's mindset because, people say, oh, well, just get over it. And especially when they're telling that to a man. We don't tell that to women. We don't tell people to get over their emotions. This is how they feel. And it is quite okay for them to experience emotional distress. It's how they handle it. Obviously, for this particular person, they were experiencing such distress that it's carrying on. But that's quite easy to understand because every time they're involved in a social setting and they see this other person, there is that trauma regression for them. And trauma might be a little bit of a strong word here, unless it is for this particular person causing severe distress. Nevertheless, kind of moving on, people tend to start saying, well, there's no infidelity because no one was deceived. We were on a break. So theoretically, no one had to be pressured into agreeing to something which their partner, wouldn't be comfortable with in the first place. That's the stance more often than not when people are on a break they take. But when you're in a marriage, you're still locked into a union. You still agreed, in front of the state, if you've signed a license, this is the person you agreed to spend your life with. And a lot of the times when I always actually tell people, and there's actually many therapists globally that will tell you, I always suggest not only once you're starting a relationship, even a couple of years in, before you go off and get married, invest some time into some sort of spiritual therapy, couples retreats, and really delve into the subject of, is this the person I want to commit to? Are there problems that I know as a teammate we can get over and get through together? Because when we start involving and trying to justify infidelity to a married partner, they're the ones that now have to struggle with that reconciliation, to struggle with rebuilding that trust. The person who has committed the act then usually takes on a defensive posture and doesn't understand why the other person is constantly hurt or upset. It continues to build and continues to wind up the relationship before it kind of hits its breaking point. However, looking at some other angles around this whole thing, couples have to be willing to deal with the possibility that whether or not, if they're on a break, if a married couple takes a break and they've said, you know what, we will do therapy every week, but we want to agree to a 6-month separation, there always has to be that possibility inside of that time, even if the parameters are there that, okay, sex isn't allowed, but dating is allowed. So they're now allowing a other party on either side to come in to their relationship dynamic, that once they agree to this, both partners need to understand that there is a potentiality for someone to fall in love with somebody else, especially when we start needing our emotional intimacy, that emotional closeness. No one likes to sit at home, be there by themselves, have constant reminders, and then always feel depressed while they believe, whether their partner is doing it or not, is out having a good time celebrating with their friends and experiencing the world. It starts building up resentment. So we need to look at, especially with these couples, married couples who are looking to reconcile with each other, how do we get over these feelings of betrayal? How do we start to move on from the incidents of infidelity, if they happen, if we haven't agreed to them? How do we start to heal? What's the process? So we need to understand the communication breakdown and where that lies. So we have to accept that the person who committed the act of cheating and the person who was their spouse who was cheated on may have different beliefs in how things worked out. So meaning their times, how all these timelines and things worked out. Look at it this way. A common scenario is when someone, the person who went out and had sex with somebody else, and their spouse finds out, and then the person who cheated starts to get angry with their spouse because the spouse is not hasn't gotten over the infidelity. They're literally angry at their partner for not getting past what they had done. What people who do this don't tend to understand is that it's hard, emotionally destructively hard, to be reminded of the pain consistently caused by you. And we don't tend to understand that, we're in the wrong. We look at, our partner caused me to do this. If they just done this one thing. Don't get me wrong here, and I'm going to say something that's a little bit controversial. No matter how much fault we want to lay on the blame on the person who has committed, who has cheated on us, how much blame we believe they deserve 100%. This is going to be the tough one, and this is going to be the controversial statement. But not all 100% lies of the culpability of the infidelity completely lies with the person who cheated. That means there was a breakdown somewhere in the relationship. That means there was a breakdown in something we didn't know. Did I go out and meet a guy who, I saw this guy dating my best friend and I just wanted to have sex. So I like him. I want him for me. Common. It happens quite often. So what happens? They go out, they cheat on their friend with her boyfriend. Somehow they start dating, and then is shocked to learn that he's done this again. Well, this has told this guy that this behavior is acceptable, that this behavior is allowed. He did it with you. Why not do it with somebody else? So we have to accept that responsibility. If we know that our partner is going to go out and she gets involved with somebody else, and there's not only the physical intimacy side lacking, that's lacking in the marriage, and she starts confiding, and so we, as men, we find out there's this also emotional betrayal. We have to also understand our role in that. Are we communicating enough? Did our partner go out and seek someone else because we're not talking about our emotional feelings here enough? Are we not coming across and listening to them? And it's hard for men. I've written a lot about that lately. I've talked a lot about that lately, and I don't want to digress into that too much, but I'm trying to just give you a couple of different scenarios here of what's going on. If you're the person who's been betrayed or if you're the person who betrayed your partner, your spouse, you have to understand the hurt feelings need to be validated. We can't just tell them, all right, you need to dismiss them now. It's been 3 weeks. So it's time to move on. But that a constant venting and marinating in that pain is going to make it even more difficult to heal the relationship. If you're just sitting there with your arms crossed and all pissed off because your partner's in tears over what happened, that also means there's a bigger emotional imbalance between you two. You're not on the same page. The fact that you're angry that your partner's sitting there crying and can't get over this speaks more volumes about your character and your responsibility in the relationship and your lack of effort in the relationship than theirs. We also need to understand that the partner who was unfaithful needs to take full responsibility for what happened. They have to empathize with their partner. They have to understand that their partner is going to hurt. They're going to feel upset. They may be not physically have physical symptoms like nausea when they see us. They're going to feel betrayed. And if they want to move forward through these acts of, betrayal, that they are willing to work on changing their behavior going forward, to talking about it until there is a resolution. And even at that, you have to set a date. Because you also don't want to be 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, 10 years down the line, and these things are still coming out. That means there was no final resolution. And it is okay for the partner who was betrayed to go, you know what? I haven't fully discussed this yet. I need to concentrate on this for the next couple of weeks. We need to really talk about it, get it out, and air the dirty laundry so we can move forward. For some, there is no letting go. That betrayal runs too deep. So for the person who was deceived in this action, we need to start utilizing our coping skills that we learn to manage those difficult feelings that are going to arise, especially when a regression happens. Because we can almost be certain that if we want to get intimate with our partner, because there is that draw, especially when we are feeling emotionally needy, that usually is a heightened moment. When we really want to engage in some intimate activity, we're instantly going to be thrown into a memory regression where we're imagining our partner with someone else. And all of these feelings are going to resurface again. However, we have to make sure that we're effectively assertive instead of being unproductively harsh. We have to now state new boundaries, state where we are, and kind of hit the reset button. We have to create a plan moving forward. How are we going to commit to being monogamous? How is this going to work? Are we going to work on our personal growth? Are we going to go to couples workshops together? Are we going to read books on healthy relationships? Are we going to get involved in therapy? Are we going to, are there going to be any more, discoveries of other infidelity acts? Everything has to be aired on the table. It kind of starts to become a one-shot deal, because if it's not a one-shot deal, what ends up happening is our partners start going, okay, I'm here, I'm committed, this act happened. You're working with whomever, or you're at a workshop and everybody's gung-ho, we want to repair the relationship. And it comes time for that whole honesty box time. All right, has there been anything else? No. 2 weeks later down the line, what ends up happening? We end up discovering our partner's still on social media apps, commenting with other people, talking to other people. Again, the feelings of betrayals surface. Trust is completely diminished yet again. We make another promise. The person who is deceived makes more promises. The promises end up becoming hollow. Right? Now, I'm kind of giving the big layover here of what's really going on. Now, although I've detracted a little bit, I wanted to basically get to this understanding and point where we are kind of at inside of these relationships. We need to start understanding that when there is healthy and productive communication that's lacking in a relationship, right, we end up arriving at a point where all we are looking at is that there's the subjectivities and what we can engage in, right? And were we even able to maintain any sort of healthy communication and therefore really maintain a healthy relationship? If everything is remotely subjective, meaning it's only our opinion and it's not objective, where we are looking at the facts and how to make things move forward, then things aren't going to work. So how do we begin to do these things? Is it about our positions and how we feel, or is it really about the dynamic that we're in? So I want to kind of move away from the marriage side, take it more to the relationship side. So we're still talking about two people committed, connected, and together moving forward. But what we're looking at here is we're taking it one step down below marriage, right? So we need to understand that when these things arise, and if we've agreed to a separation, we've agreed to do whatever we want to do, then at that point, you've kind of said, without the therapeutic agreement, you've kind of stated the rules, which you can't. You know what? I'm going to break up with my slave. If you want to go out and do what you want to do, great. I am literally going to go out and do what I want to do. Right? But you can't always choose, especially now if this is a person you want to return to or you want to recommit to. You can't choose your position or your stance of being right, and I said this earlier, over the relationship. You either want to choose that relationship and how you feel connected to that person, that emotional intimacy you're sharing, or you're going to choose your high ground position. And when we look at this kind of dichotomy between Ross and Rachel, and it's actually known as the Ross and Rachel effect, what they ended up choosing is they both chose to be right. Neither side listened. Neither side put forth any compromise. Neither side allowed each other to talk. More so, neither side allowed each other to be heard. And sometimes this ends up happening we take these positions, we fervently take these positions, we defend them with our lives, is because then at moments inside of our relationships, inside of our dynamics in a DS relationship where, one has complete control over another, or somebody's completely submitting themselves to another individual, we also can get lost inside of these relationships. And sometimes we end up losing our self-identity. When you're inside of a relationship, when you're inside of a dynamic, your identity and who you are can sometimes become blurred because now everything you're doing is a single solitary unit. You're one force moving together. I often tell people you cannot neglect your individual activities, your individual hobbies, your individual friends. It is okay if, and it happens quite often, she likes sports and he likes to read. That's fine. Let her go out and enjoy time with her friends, sharing stories and, enjoying watching baseball. And you want to go read a book on Kurt Vonnegut, great, go do it. Don't pressure your partner into activities they're not going to like just because you need this sudden codependent need to be around each other. It's unhealthy and it will make the relationship stagnate and ultimately stall and crash. Right? A lot of the arguments that couples tend to have is that way for them to establish their own identity that is separate from them, that is a separate version of their own person that stands for something different from their partner. During healthy communications, this is okay, but the unfortunate part about all of this is that when we start to get in a heated discussion that, erupts into a yelling match, we no longer are saying our needs. We're now looking to who can top who can see more hurtful things so we can come out on top. We're no longer thinking about the relationship. We're now thinking about the damage we can do. Because we just want to maintain ourselves. We want to maintain who we were. And we even start thinking to ourselves, are we going to be, we might be just better off alone. When we look at this whole Ross and Rachel effect and the overall kind of status or schism that it's created over time, the reality is that they both made terribly poor and bad decisions in the heat of the moment. Neither one of them knew where they stood. Right? We can start picking this whole thing apart. We should have, Ross's friends should have intervened and been with him at the bar so he wasn't drinking himself to the point where his inhibitions is lowered and his emotional state wasn't going to be clouded. Right? While Ross knows that when he got involved with his other party, he probably did on some sort of level, realized there was going to be an emotional state. And what I mean by an emotional state was that he was trying to fill up that void of hurt and pain that was inside because he was on this break or separation from Rachel. But the reality was, because he was on this break or separation from Rachel, and he in his mind, because they're not together, he in his mind did not, it wasn't cheating. And the reality is that depending on who you ask, was it or wasn't it? Well, if you're not together anymore and you're out sleeping with somebody else, what you do as an individual, as somebody who's solo, is then at that point solo. If you plan on getting back together, if there is a hope of reconciliation there, then you are going to end up having to discuss some of these things, because there is that moment where you need to let somebody else decide what they want to do. There is a technique that some therapists like to use. I've had mixed results with it, but we look at our two partners married, just in a long-term relationship and a DS dynamic or MS dynamic. And the first thing I like to do and learn from some really wonderful therapists over my time is I like one partner to make one statement, and then I ask the second partner to repeat back that statement in their own words what the first partner said. What this does is it it's quite illuminating, the effects, because we don't really understand when we hear something, how we take that in, how we think about it, how we kind of conceptualize it in our mind, and then all of a sudden we have to regurgitate out what we think was said and how diverse the statements coming back out end up sounding. It's almost like they're speaking, one person's speaking Mandarin and the other person is speaking Hindi. They're not communicating, right? And it's kind of like the game when we were children, where our teacher sits us in a circle with all of the kids, and she'll say a phrase like the book's in the library, and by the time it gets to the end of the circle, there was a car and a tree with a banana and a goat, and we don't even know how it got there. At the end of the day, we need to start thinking about, how do we get together? How do we get over the hurt? How do we move forward? Communication, healthy negotiations, talking about what's right and wrong, and then learning that, we may need to seek counseling or seek some sort of workshop to work through all of these dynamic resolutions so we're not left feeling wondering or lost. The one example I gave you earlier about the relationship with the gentleman who's still having regressions 20 years after, 2 decades later, is because there's this constant reminder that's never really been talked about. There probably isn't any healthy boundaries set into place, so that insecurity is still there for him. And when we look at these things, you have to make sure you're clear that if at some point you've decided, I need a break from my partner, what are the parameters? If you're more committed than that, if you're in something long-term where they're collared, or you're in a 5-year relationship, or you are married, something where there's a lot more commitment. You're sharing finances, you might own a home together, you may or may not have kids, you might have pets together, whatever the case may be. If you work together, which might make it more awkward, you have to come to some sort of a resolution of what you will and will not do during that time of separation. If you don't, all that will continually happen is the spurring of unhealthy emotions between the two of you. There won't be a reconciliation. There will be hurt, there will be anger, and it will constantly keep festering, because all people will be involved in is an attempt to consistently be right and defend their position, instead of defending the reason why they got together in the first place, what kept them together in the first place, and addressing the issues that got them to the point of where they are at, and why they're coming to talk to someone like me or the other therapists, or going to workshops and trying to work through those issues. Don't take it out on each other. Don't do things. Understand if you've caused hurt, if you're the one who's caused the infidelity, admit to it, accept your partner's feedback, support their emotional state, especially if you're working on reconciliation, and set a time frame that's healthy for the both of you to move forward. You do have to accept, if you're the person who cheated, there may not be a time frame for you. You may have crossed a line that there's no coming back. For the person who has been hurt, it can be an introspective search. What went wrong? Is there a way back? Do I want a way back? All of these thousands of questions that will pop into your mind, and how do you deal with the regressions once they hit you? I know this is quite a different topic, but it is one that we do deal with in the lifestyle, BDSM, and fetish community. And it's important because our community is quite small. And so if we have a submissive or a dominant that we break up with, or a bottom, or a baby girl, whatever the case may be, and we now know that in our local community we're going to see them out, how are we going to deal with those feelings and emotions? And the only way is by confronting them, being honest about them, and learning to work through that emotional distress you may encounter. But you just have to do it in a healthy manner. Until next time, everyone, be safe and stay kinky.